Hello, my name is Pip Wallis. Welcome to this In Conversation with Camille Henrot on the occasion of her exhibition Is Today Tomorrow at the National Gallery of Victoria. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the country on which the NGV stands and the traditional owners of the Kulin Nation, the Bunurong and Woiwurrung, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to extend that respect to any First Nations people who might be watching today. So it is a great pleasure to be joined by Camille Henrot. Camille, welcome to the NGV virtually. We're very excited to be opening your exhibition Is Today Tomorrow here at the gallery. It's of course a disappointment that we can't have you here with us, but it's really lovely to be able to talk about some of the works that will be in the exhibition with you today. Thinking about institutions of authority or the fallacy of authority, I wanted to talk about your work Interphones, which will be in this exhibition, which are a series of telephones which visitors can pick up and listen to the voice of a speaker who offers questions or advice. And for me, this work, it looks at the way we experience guidance and control, care and authority. And I wondered if you could say a little bit about how you came to script the audio tracks that are playing under the interphones.
All of them had a bit of a different strategies, but the first one was Bad Dad and Beyond, which compiled the problems one can have with his father and the problem you can have with a computer or internet connection. I was thinking about dependency and how the things we depend on are abusing their power in many ways, knowing that you depend on them. And so first I did a sort of like a research into bad dad, like historical bad dads, from Agamemnon killing one of his daughters to change the weather forecast and win a war, to I mean, I don't want to enter into too darker places, but it looks like father has been bad since historical time. And it was interesting that there was so many manifestation of father being bad. And then I thought really like it's interesting to make that connection with the system, or like with the idea of like the structure we depend on. So then we compiled also, I worked with a poet, Jacob Bromberg, who also worked with me on growth fatigue. And we went a lot online through, like blogs where people complain about their connection or their computer. And like we took inspiration from the message people would leave there in like those technological blogs searching for answers. So that's how like the question became like, if your father killed your sister to change the weather forecast and deleted files without your permission, press 1. And so that would be a bit like how it was born. For example, another one we did is easy cheating. And easy cheating is functioning, the telephone function on the idea of like trying to get information from somebody, and how through the attempt of trying to get information, you become spied on. It's a bit, in French we call it l'arroseur arrosé, which is one of the first film of Les Frères Lumière, the joke, somebody's trying to spray water and then it falls on him. And so it's easy cheating started with like, oh, did you notice anything special in the pocket? Did you find a napkin from the lobster roll?
So this is a work that asks, is your husband cheating on you? And it asks you various questions about gaining clues, much like a kind of helpline.
It's supposed to help you find out if your partner is cheating on you. There's many websites online, if you look for it, that are proposing these services. And they start, by asking questions, and then very quickly, I mean, my telephone, but I think also those websites too, very quickly start being very intrusive into your own life and ask, what is your credit card number? How much money do you make by year? Do you want a child? Why don't you have a child? Do you have a genetical disease? Do you know the birthday of your mother? And then it becomes really a sort of like guilt trip process. And so that's a bit how this one was born. Another one, Isolation, is inspired by psychiatrists, questionnaire and technique to get to have their patient trust them. One, Dog Shaming, is inspired by a dangerous dog, and so it's combining problems of with living with a narcissistic pervert. So most of them have sort of like different sets of problems, but the common dynamic is the same. It's exploring how a service is also always paid through a certain type of loss. And of course, this loss is your own pride and intimacy.
The dependence and care dynamic that is at play is really unsettling. And the feelings that you have when experiencing this work, as you say, shame and embarrassment, very human experiences, much like the feeling of Googling for the answer to a very private psychological question, the kind of how humiliating that experience is, but how so many of us do it to try and connect with someone who can tell us the answer. I'm interested in how this work relates to some other works that are in the exhibition, particularly works from your series Systems of Attachment, thinking about this membrane between the private self and the public world, how we negotiate that. I'm thinking particularly of a work that is titled I Am Both Saturn's Child and Saturn Himself. And it refers, of course, to the Roman god Saturn and the myth about him eating his own children to prevent them from usurping him. And this is a work that is watercolor and painterly in its form. It's very liquid as an image, but also the image is of a parent and a baby in the bath. And so I'm interested to hear a little bit about this idea of liquidity and the kind of sense of self in this work, if you would say something about that.
Yes, the liquidity is something I started to work in 2019 when I started to work on the topic of like birth and like early childhood and parenting, and something about a memory of my old studies, because I did my memoir on the relationship between the super violent action films and the Gutai movement. Gutai, you know, is a Japanese expressionism. So there's something about the experience of birth or pregnancy, birth, and the beginning of life of human that is really, I don't know how to describe, messy and dirty and splashy. And so in a way, it was interesting to me to draw that connection between, you know, this idea of like abstract expressionism, but also like body fluids, like body leaks, and the messiness of human life at its very beginning, when actually also a little bit when before there's words, you know. So we talk about abstraction, but abstraction doesn't really exist. We were talking earlier about the way our human brains are able to build narrative and create meaning out of it. Narrative and meaning exist even before there's words, and if the same goes for shape, also before there's shape. So this language of very splashy liquid came naturally. I remember my studio was so full of red paint that it made me think of this. There's a book of poem I really like. It's called Inside the Blood Factory. And so the studio was very much a blood factory. And because all the background I wanted would be this very, very bright red. So this is for the sort of like language. Then the title comes a little bit from the, I would say the fear, and also, I mean, it's also a fact, fear and the fact that between the parents and the child, something of another generation is being transmitted. Of course, what you have lived as a child is resurfacing when you become a parent, and this can bring terror in some cases. And so I've been thinking very much a lot about that, that the way as a parent you project through your children emotion, but to have empathy, and this is how you can care correctly for a small baby that doesn't speak, is by actually, putting literally yourself at his place. And this is also something that happened, naturally. But it's also a very scary place to be, because it's a place of powerlessness, and it's also a place without words, and it's a place with terror and like terrible fear as well. And so this is a little bit how for me the title connects. Also, the character in the bath, I like that there is no, you're not completely sure it's a woman or a man. It depends of I did many iterations of it. And I do feel also in the experience of motherhood, something of the dynamic of binary gender gets destroyed. It's a bit actually the opposite of what you would imagine. Traditionally, people or patriarchal society would present you with the idea that having a child makes you a woman, but I think it's actually quite the opposite. I think having a child makes you go out of the binaries of the two gender, because the experience itself, being so full of violence, being so full of trauma, being so complex and so destructive of your own previous identity, that it's not really relevant, I would say, from a personal point of view, but also even from a developmental point of view. Small children, when they are before 5, they think they can both carry a baby in their bellies and have a penis. So there is a psychological bisexuality that exists right from the start. And I think there's so much we need to unlearn about, those categories: motherhood, fatherhood, parenting, and early childhood.
I was interested to hear you say recently in an interview that when you spoke about the bodies of work like Interphones or Bad Dad, that people understood that the male figure was an analogy for wider societal questions. But as soon as you introduced the woman and maternal questions into your work, people assume that it's very personal and specific to you. But actually, I think one of the amazing things about systems of attachment is it's how identifiable it is, these experiences of loss of self, of this slippery subjecthood. And they're very much broader themes that we see in your other bodies of work. And one of those is of course, contradiction. And I wanted to say how your work, it avoids literalism so well. You play with language, you play with poetics, you play with humor. Can you tell me why it's so important to avoid the literal interpretation in your work?
So I start with the difference of interpretation between the maternal and the paternal image. It's interesting to see that immediately the Bad Dad and Beyond was read as an exhibition, as a critique of figures of authorities. While when I started working on system of attachment, so many people and like in interviews, and trying to present the work as sort of like drawing from my own experience. And I remember I think it's Lucy Rigaret, this author, who said that very often women's biography get used against themselves as a way to discredit their experience from being understood as a global, as a public material. And this is something we still witness everywhere. So I'm very cautious about this. And I knew also that being a woman would be very difficult to avoid this type of association. This is why I've been writing so much about the topic, because it felt like the possibility to be misunderstood was so huge when I started to work on it. And it's really a problem. We almost need another word than motherhood. And actually, we sometimes also feel like we need another word for women too, because the heritage of the prejudice is so heavy, it's so ingrained, it's so difficult to get to open more the meaning of those categories, that of course there is a centuries of prejudice that comes in the way. It's interesting to see also that what comes all the topic related to motherhood gets classified into the anecdotal. I have actually a few friends of mine trying to do books about motherhood, and they were rejected from the big publisher that said it was too much of a niche topic. And this is actually quite laughable when you think that we are all of women born. So it's hard actually to find a more universal topic than that. It's almost like, imagine somebody, you would do a book about death, and the publisher would answer in your face, "Oh, sorry, but it's too much of a niche topic."
It does make things very stark, doesn't it?
Yes. So this was actually quite an observation. I mean, I think it's changing. I think a lot of artists, a lot of philosophers and art critics are writing more and more about it, and I'm confident it will change at some point. But it's true that there is still the assumption that actually, and it's really patriarchy, that every woman's specific experience needs to be discredited as anecdotal and private and intimate. And to answer the second part of your question about the necessity to stay complex and to stay, how do you say, I don't know how you formulate it, but to keep some kind of ambiguity in the work, it's a bit of a defense strategy, but it's also because I don't want to do something that is boring to me. I mean, it's not the point to be an artist and come through all those struggles and difficulty and instabilities so that you do something that you're not completely convinced. I personally, when I read a text, when I look at an artwork, I like when I don't understand immediately, or I understand, but I also see many other layers and I'm not sure. And I feel like this is very much the space that we can offer us artists that is different from, newspaper, academic article, advertisement, entertainment. This is what we can offer. We can offer the possibility to be disturbed, to make mistakes, to not know, to propose different interpretation, to contradict ourselves. And I think this space where ideas confront and where sometimes it goes really beyond the binaries category of thoughts, and the binary opinion is really what we can offer, and it's the water I want to swim in. If artists would be a fish, this is my water. I want my water to be a little bit dirty and not so transparent. And I really feel also, if you're an artist and you're presenting an object, it needs to be something that is quite open as an object. It needs to be like a fan. There needs to be multiple possibilities of interpretation. And like a fan, it needs to provide people with air, with the possibility to make their own, to breathe and to make their own interpretation, and not to impose a suffocating opinion that is one-dimensional.
It's very pleasurable to swim in this dirty water with you, and we're very glad to be able to do that here during your exhibition Is Today Tomorrow, and also just to have an opportunity to hear your thoughts today here on this video. So thank you very much, Camille, for joining me.
Thank you very much, Pip. It was a pleasure to talk to you too.